Good afternoon, everybody. Excuse me. This is Kathy Greenler-Sexton, and I'm with the SIIA. Today we are hosting a conference with Russell Perkins from the InfoCommerce Group focused on private company and people data, specifically what's new and working. I'd like to welcome everybody, and if you have any questions, please let us know via the chat window. If you have any technical difficulties, there's an email on your screen. Please email Jenny Henson with any questions. As you probably just heard, this webinar is recorded, and if you would like a copy of the presentation afterwards, we'll be sending out a link to that after the conference has concluded. We encourage questions, so again, please make sure you ask them throughout the conference in the chat window in your lower left-hand corner. For those of you who are not familiar with the SIIA, we are the principal trade association for the software and information industry. And what does that mean? We promote and protect the industry, and we also, like this webinar, focus on a lot of educational programs that our members are interested in. And many of our programs support the goal of business and corporate development. You can see on your screen the areas of the SIIA that our members participate in. At the core is our public policy and anti-piracy work. That really is a leading program in the industry, working on behalf of our members, helping educate and inform those who are creating the rules and regulations, as well as working on behalf of our members to support anti-piracy efforts. The content division, which I lead, focuses on media, publishing, and information services. And you can see the other divisions are CLOSIPA is our sister division focused on specialized and niche information, as well as the other divisions that you can see on the screen. SIIA members, as part of their membership, can enjoy all the different programs being offered across the SIIA. I'd like you to mark your calendars since this is a data-focused webinar. We do have a couple of others that are coming up that you might want to be aware of. One that's not on here is the SIPA Annual Conference. That's in DC, June 5 through 7. And Megan St. John from the InfoCommerce Group is going to be leading a data boot camp the first morning there on June 5th. So if you're interested in getting a good primer of data and how it relates to your publishing and information business, that'll be a great morning spent with Megan. You can see the other webinars that we're planning coming up, all leading up to data content in Philadelphia, October 15th through 17th. We've got a great program scheduled, and if you would like any more information, please go to siia.net/content to see our full schedule. So with that, I'm going to start handing it over to Russell Perkins. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask myself or Jenny on any of the programs. If you have any issues, via the chat box or Jenny's email that was mentioned at the front. And so Russell, I'd like to officially welcome you to the webinar. Russell is the founder and managing director of InfoCommerce Group and our partner in bringing to you the Data Content Conference in October. Russell?
Thanks, Kathy. Good morning / afternoon, everyone. The session today, as you heard, is going to take a look at both people databases and private company data. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on out there in the marketplace, take a look at some of the interesting companies that are doing different things, and I'll leave you with a little bit of prognostication at the end as well, just to hopefully get you thinking and focused on what some of the issues and trends in the industry are going to be as we go forward. And again, I just want to stress that really what we're going to take here is more of a dive onto the broad-based providers of both people and private company information. So we're not going to be focused as much on what's going on in vertical markets, but looking at the people who are doing sort of the mass-scale databases that are crossing all the different verticals. So we got a lot to talk about, and let's dive right in. Okay. start maybe with what I'll call the 40,000-foot view. I've noticed playing with business databases over many, many years that there's sort of what I call the holy trinity of business data, that they all seem to contain, generally speaking, some combination of company, people, and product data. And what we're seeing is a lot of activity against all three fronts going on right these days. Tremendous strides in broad-based people databases. We're going to talk about that today. Just as an aside, there's also a lot of activity around product data, but that is such a big area to tackle that it's really being done more on a market-by-market basis. And if you're interested there, I'd point you to companies like GS1, OneSync, and Global Spec as two examples of some of the leading edge work being done there. That's sort of outside the scope of today's presentation. And there's also been a lot of relatively recent initiatives around private company data as well. And what's interesting to me is that while you can handle some combination of that holy trinity on a vertical basis, it's very, very difficult to do that on a broad brush horizontal basis. I think partly because, if only because of the sale, but because there's some complexities each one, and maintaining it all and holding it together gets to be very challenging, which is why you tend to see specialization. What I'd like to do for the presentation today, just to make it a little bit more manageable, is I'm going to break it into two pieces. We're going to talk about the companies that are primarily working around people, professional executive data right now, and then separately we'll take a look at the ones that are more focused on company-based information. Now, this is a little bit arbitrary division I'm making here, but I think it makes the presentation just a little bit easier to get across to you. So let's dive right into it. For people data, there really are two primary use cases. There's the big use case, which is sales prospecting, and there's the much smaller use case of recruiting. Recruiting is ironically very important here, even though it's a fairly small application in the scheme of things, because I never cease to be amazed by the number of recruiters who are willing to pay very big dollars for one, sometimes two, three, four different people databases for use in their work. And interesting to me is that a lot of the companies that are big players in this space right now really got their start with support from the recruiting industry, paying, again, fairly handsome prices for their databases. And I think that's why some of them get, at least in their early stages, a bit more oriented towards the needs of recruiters, and then become a little bit more focused on sales prospecting as time goes by and they build the business and start to diversify. For a long time now, both the recruiters and salespeople have found that they can get good value out of company data. It's a great starting point for them in the work they need to do. But what they really both dreamed about was getting company data that was tightly married to good, deep people data as well. But that's a place where the big legacy company data providers have typically been very weak. They just have not been able to gather and maintain a lot of good, deep information on people at specific companies. And at the same time, until very recently, there weren't any real independent, significant databases of people. So the industry was, to a large extent, making do with what was possible. And the simple explanation for this is gathering people data is extremely hard. It was something that really required primary research. It was a slow, expensive slog to get through, again, until recently. So the question you're probably asking yourself is, what happened recently? And what we've seen recently is sort of three new models towards building people databases, and they interestingly appeared almost simultaneously, and I'll put them into three buckets that I think kind of work to describe them all. There's the first bucket I'll call the scrapers, and I think the real pioneer there was ZoomInfo, that proved that you could obtain and organize and really find a lot of value in people data that you could be pulling from the open web, with the nice benefit that it was free for the taking. And they did some really pioneering stuff in terms of not only standardizing and normalizing that information, but also integrating it and correlating it across different sources to get even more insight into both people and companies, but with, I think, a focus on people. The second model, I'll call them the traders, and that's where salespeople and others sort of traded their business contacts online. I call it a model much like kids swapping baseball cards. And I think Jigsaw was sort of the poster child for this model, which frankly I never could have believed would have worked at the time, but it's taken off like a rocket ship since. And then the final category, we call them the networkers. Best example is probably LinkedIn, where people are voluntarily submitting their information and, believe it or not, maintaining their information into huge central databases with where they're providing detailed biographical and career data. So 3 different models, and they all work. It got kind of interesting to me, too, that as the these new people databases started to emerge and they got successful and they got increasingly large, that the people behind them really started to get a little bit dismissive of company data, saying that it was people data that really carried the day. And I still remember that the humorous example of Jigsaw at one point running around with a video that included someone in a dinosaur suit representing the old model of company data, and actually at one point giving away its company data for free, really in part to drive leads, but also in part to reinforce this point that the value today had shifted to people data. So there was an interesting perspective that is still sort of sorting itself out in the industry. And I think those roles still are being defined. I think what we saw fairly quickly is the company data providers realized that they could get a lot closer to that nirvana that their customers wanted, and they rushed out to license names from the people data providers to augment their own databases. A little more quietly, we saw the people data providers started licensing firmographic or business data from the company data providers. They found that they needed to have information like company size or headquarter indicator or business classification system in order to make their people data more useful and searchable. So they went out and realized, again, rather than build it, it just made more sense to license it. Now, interestingly, what you would expect out of that is since the people data now have company data and the company data now have people data, they should all be head-to-head competitors. And to some extent that's true, but what we're seeing in the marketplace, at least so far, is there seems to be room for everyone. I think the main reason for that is we're dealing with such a huge prospect universe for this with lots of different use cases and special applications. The other interesting thing that I'm seeing out there is the different database providers are really optimizing themselves to different CRM and Salesforce automation applications out there. So sort of making bets, it would appear, as to which ones are the best to align themselves with. And that sort of creates some niching out in the marketplace as well. So there's a lot of settling out, I imagine, that's still going to have to be done. But so far, there's room for everyone, and everyone seems to be doing very well. And back to that point I made earlier, there does seem to be sort of a tacit acknowledgement out there that no one company really has the resources to seriously tackle both company and people data at once. And I know some of you are jumping out of your seats right now having heard that, but please note my use of the word seriously and the notion of doing this at scale as well. It is a difficult challenge to do both well, and it's interesting that the market's sort of bifurcated at this part with 2 different types of providers. Now, this could easily change as technology continues to evolve and companies get acquired and combined, but it's just an interesting note on sort of state of play right now. So for these people data providers, is it really blue skies going forward? There are some issues bubbling under the surface. There are comprehensiveness issues, and despite the differences in those 3 models I just described to you, all of the current players are kind of living in a get-what-they-can-get environment. Scrapers are limited to what they can grab off the open web. The traders need people who have both the data and the willingness to enter it. And the networkers need voluntary participation. And this issue of what's in it for me or with them is a big issue with both people data and we'll see to a lesser extent with company data. So everyone's got what they can get right now. It's masked a little bit by the fact that they have large quantities of names. I think the novelty of that is going to start to wear off after a little bit, but we'll talk more about that. The net of it is there's a glut of players out there. You have these pure data companies that have built people databases. You have a whole other set of companies out there doing lead generation and prospect identification. And then you have the more traditional, if you will, list sources of data. And all of those sort of blur into each other. And it's everyone's jockeying for position to say, who can deliver the best product at the best value to the largest market. So there is probably going to be a shakeout at some point, some combinations. There's risk of commoditization. A lot of this people data is still being offered, at least in part, for free. And as we've learned on the Internet, that sets expectations remarkably quickly. We want to see if we can pull out of that and if we can hold up the value of people data over time. We do have, again, this quality issue that goes along with the comprehensiveness issue. As long as you have to take what you can get, you don't have a lot of control over your input. Now, all of these companies are doing a lot of work on the back end to push these through a lot of validation processes and quality control to try and maintain the quality. But typically this is something you want to control at the front end, not the back end, because there's a limit to what you can do on the back end. And that's just not the way these various models work. The other thing to think about is that there's always a risk of some or all of this becoming a fad. Will the novelty of trading business contacts wear off? Will the perceived value of inputting your data into a central resume database wear off? We don't know, but what we've seen in other areas online, especially around social media, is some of these things can become red hot almost overnight and then crash and burn very quickly thereafter from, frankly, what's a fairly jaded audience out there that's always looking for the next interesting, exciting thing. Whether these have long-term durability, nobody knows, but I think there's still some good optimism around all the different models for different reasons. So let's talk about some of the companies who are in the game right now and what makes them interesting and distinctive. Probably when we talk about people data, the 800-pound gorilla is LinkedIn. They're claiming about 200 million profiles worldwide. And this is a company that's got more profiles, deeper profiles, a lot of creativity within the company, and always pulling some new trick out of the bag to keep it fresh and interesting. So there's a lot of power behind this thing. What I do know with LinkedIn is I'm watching them slowly reduce the amount of information they're giving away for free. I think that is something they need to do, but there's definitely risk associated with that. They have to find that unknown point of balance where they're giving away enough that they're still considered a useful central repository, but locking up enough that they can start to charge for some of it, and that's tricky. The other thing I've noticed is a very intense focus on building out content around their database recently. Again, I think that's smart because they're worried about ongoing engagement of the people who've supplied profiles, but hopefully that's not really going to be their entire focus, and that's a piece of a larger strategy that they're working on. Jigsaw, again, probably the poster child for the trading model. You put in contacts, you take out contacts. A great business. It was sold to Salesforce.com a couple years back, and it's now within a part of Salesforce called Data.com. Interesting to me, though, is that after a very noisy launch for Data.com, we haven't heard much news out of them. I believe at this point it's pretty much Jigsaw data and Dun & Bradstreet data. I think the intention is for it to have an awful lot more, but I'm not sure whether they're quietly working dozens of deals in the background or they're rethinking their strategy at this point. We're just going to have to watch, I guess. NetProspects is another very interesting company. I think around 25 million people contacts at this point. I don't mean this in any negative way, but I think I would describe them as sort of Jigsaw plus telephone verification. The company's done very well. It's grown very rapidly. And again, we're seeing a lot of innovation and sophistication there as well. So they're giving Jigsaw a real run for the money and certainly a significant player in the people information space. And again, I've already talked a little bit about ZoomInfo, but with 65 million people, that's a very significant database. And they live with all the inherent strengths and weaknesses of a scraping model. They can only get what's available to them. They have to combine disparate data, which is always a little bit risky and imperfect. They don't always know exactly how current any piece of information is, and they've done a lot to sort of offset some of those weaknesses. But again, all these different models come with their own inherent strengths and weaknesses. The nicest one, I think, about the scraping model is you don't have to ask anyone. You don't have to encourage anyone to participate. You just go and grab it. Some other players, Lead 411, they claim about 3 million names. I'd characterize them as sort of a scrappy catch-up play. They got into this a little bit on the late side. What's interesting to me is they claim that they're scraping, they've got access to licensed data, and they're doing manual research as well to pull the whole database together. I don't know to what extent they're doing any one of those three activities, but it's sort of an interesting company to watch. Another one I put on the list is a company called Spoke. They were very interesting to me when they first came out, I think around 2003, 2004 in that area, because they were a very innovative mix, I thought, of both licensed and scraped data. They were putting it together and then asking people sort of on a wiki basis or user-generated basis to come in and then further update their own information. If they had pulled that off, it would have probably been extremely powerful. It never really got traction. It's reinvented itself a number of times, and I looked at it the other day, and it seems to have morphed into sort of a scrape wiki model, and it's not clear exactly what the revenue model for it is. I'm not sure it's a viable player at this point, but I hold it out there again as a possibility to offer some lessons learned for all of us. Still another company that's hit the scene early this year was called Relationship Science, currently about 2 million name records. They came out with immense buzz around them because they've got some very successful, well-known deep pocket players backing them. I guess probably the way to describe them shorthand is sort of a LinkedIn of important people. Not everyone gets in, I guess, but if you are, you're somebody, and that probably does have value in certain specific applications. And it'll be interesting to see how they build it out as they go along. And I'd also hold out to you a company called Reachable, which really isn't a database company in the pure sense, but they offer software that allows companies to organize all the information and contacts of their employees, and then they bridge it over to the big name databases such as LinkedIn, but multiple ones, so that they can really get a powerful combination of internal and external data that companies can then use to mine their employees' contacts to develop sales opportunities for them. So a lot of different sort of variant plays going on out there, a lot of creativity, but again, it's starting to get a little bit crowded as a marketplace. So let me leave you with a little prognostication on the whole people data front. I think it's entirely possible that LinkedIn could sort of emerge as sort of a standard reference database for the entire industry where other data providers and even end users will link to for definitive data on people. Not clear to me, intriguingly, is whether or not LinkedIn really wants this to be. They allow it to a certain extent. They do seem focused elsewhere right now, so we're going to have to see how that plays out. But even if that happens, I still think there is opportunity for other players in the people data space. There are a lot of niche opportunities. There are a lot of specialty needs out there. This is a very big market, and I don't think, even with a reference standard, I don't think that necessarily precludes others from doing things in this space. I think we're going to see an increasing arms race as these people data companies feel increasing pressure to enhance their value props and differentiate themselves. We're going to see a lot more effort around data validation and new approaches towards maintaining the quality of the data they have, and improve firmographics. They're going to need more information about the companies these people are associated with to make it easier for people to target them as prospects. And I continue to suspect this is going to be done more through licensing than trying to develop that information directly. there's going to be an accelerated push to get to seamless integration with CRM and SFA software systems. And interesting to me, nobody's trying to integrate with everyone so far. Everyone, all the people data companies I'm seeing are picking 3 or 4 package software platforms that they want to hook to very strongly. And I don't know if that's resource constraints or whether it's a strategic move. But it could develop to a point where, depending on what software you've selected for your company, you may be pointed to effectively 1 or 2 or 3 data providers, and the market might actually segment itself along those lines if it plays out that way. Ultimately, I think there's going to be also a lot more focus on qualification of names. Right now, we're in the giddy stage where everyone is trying to say, wow, we've got all this stuff available. Look at this big pile of names we've got. But quickly, I think it's going to morph into how many of these people are decision makers, who are the decision makers, who's got purchasing authority, how do I get to the right person. And there's been some work with company data to sort of get to those types of answers. We haven't really seen it yet on people data, but I think it is possible. I could conceive of situations where you've got someone analyzing a person to say, how long has this person been at the company? Have they moved up in job title in responsibility, and other kind of inferential type things to say whether this person is potentially influential or a decision maker within a company. So we're going to start to see, I think, necessarily a lot more creativity there. And perhaps most importantly, I think what we're going to see is more of a focus on leads. We're going to see something akin to the evolution we saw with advertising, where publishers have shifted from delivering audiences to advertisers to delivering leads to advertisers. I do see a scenario where this could really play out on the name data side as well, because people want to be handed just the right names. The fun and the thrill of sorting through millions of them to get to the needle in the haystack wears thin pretty quickly. And given that this advertising revolution came on so strong and so quickly, I don't doubt at all it could possibly happen around business data as well. And that would radically change these companies, possibly for the better, but it would be a very substantial and possibly wrenching change for some of them. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of my thinking around what's going on in people data these days, and that gives me the opportunity now to flip over to company data. And again, the separation I'm doing here is a little bit arbitrary, just to simplify the conversation. But I do really think of company data as sort of the final frontier for business information data companies, because so many of them have been working on this literally for decades now to say, how can we get deeper, more useful, more valuable information on private companies? And it's been a real challenge, and it's only very recently that we've started to see that we've made some inroads into this in a meaningful way. And it's really interesting to take a look at both some of the trends out there and some of the specific players out there in the marketplace right now. So what is it that makes company data, private company data, so special? And here I'm really talking about U.S. Private company data because it is basically private. And that's a very different scenario in Europe, for example, where not only is basic company contact information, but financial data is available in the public record. So the need and even the perception of the opportunity is very different outside the U.S. Company data is really used primarily for sales prospecting. Sure, there's lots of other ancillary uses for it, but this is by far the preponderance of the use. And that's kind of interesting to me because it creates inherently a very powerful disincentive for companies to volunteer data to you. You've got all these companies asking for data, and any savvy business owner says, if I give you all this information, my phone's going to be ringing off the hook with salespeople. Smart people will be analyzing what I'm doing so they can compete better against me. Other people will be trying to figure out how to put me out of business, and still other people are going to be trying to figure out how to buy my company, and I don't want any of that. And the easiest solution to the problem is not to volunteer any information. And that has actually been the long-term challenge in the industry. The compilation challenges are really huge, and they're getting larger and more complex as time goes by. We're actually in a situation where lots of companies now don't have at least listed telephones. They're working off mobile numbers. They're working off home numbers because they're home-based businesses. Their main number is an 800 number, which is less accessible information. We have a lot of companies that don't have websites, and there's a lot of research out there on it, but stunningly, most of them come out in the range of maybe as high as 50% of all U.S. companies do not have a website. So if you're relying on a scraping model, for example, half of U.S. business is invisible to you. More and more companies are increasingly virtual, which adds all sorts of complexities. They don't have any addresses or even phones on their websites. Their employees are scattered all over the country or the world for that matter. How do you represent something like that in a database? We worked with a company back in 2003, and they did web harvesting, and they took a sample of 200,000 business websites for us and analyzed them to see how many of them had a company address and how many of them had a phone number on their website. And what was interesting is back in 2003 is 14% had no phone number on the website whatsoever, and 26% had no address on the website whatsoever. And I don't have any real reason to think that that's changed very much in that period, but it gives you a sense of the challenge out there. And of course, you've got the larger companies, which get larger and larger and more complex and difficult to understand and describe and represent in a structured database format. In a lot of markets, you can turn to public records for a solution, but we don't have that same easy solution here. Corporation and LLC records are state-level records in the U.S., meaning you've got 50-odd sources of data, all with varying quality and detail, and some of them are making a good buck by charging for the information to boot. Not all corporations are active businesses. A lot of the corporate records don't have the address of the company or even the names of the owners. It just lists an agent, which doesn't do you any good. And a lot of businesses aren't corporations. So if you want limited partnerships, regular partnerships, or sole props, now you're talking about records that are stored at the county levels, which means you've got 3,000 varying sources of data, and a lot of those aren't even online at this point. So public records are not the easy answer to the challenge in this point. So let's talk about some of the players, and I've made, again, sort of an arbitrary attempt to organize them just to help think about them a little better. The first group I'd call the large legacy players. Some of them coming out of the credit world. D&B, I like to call them the original ground truth for business information, because as late as the 1960s, they actually had people, reporters they called them, out in the field going around from business to business, sitting down with the owner, gathering information, checking things out. But just as you can imagine, right around that period, since the number of businesses exploded, businesses are increasingly doing business nationally, internationally, the pace of business picked up so dramatically, they really had to abandon that model and now are gathering information much more like everyone else in the business. Experian is another company that has business credit data. They originally came out of TRW, which was a company known for making things like missile defense systems and consumer credit reports. It's a natural combination, and you'll see. They decided that they should do business credit too, and thought that they could do it better, faster, cheaper, and knock D&B out of the game. Obviously, they didn't succeed all that well. It's changed hands a few times, and now it's Experian, which is still a significant, credible player in the marketplace, but not the D&B killer it was envisioned to be initially. Out of the direct marketing world, Info Group is probably the last of the broad-based B2B compilers. They're really representative of that mile-wide, inch-deep type of information set that still has value out there. And again, they're putting a lot of effort into upping their game, and they're a significant player. They're also, through licensing, fueling a lot of the websites out there that are selling or giving away company information on the web. So they really do have maybe less obvious influence out there than truly exists. And from the publishing world, it's smaller, but I'll give you the example of Hoover's, which some of you might know started out as a set of print reference books with company information in them. They made the very wise decision, don't know how calculated it was, to get onto the various online systems very early. So they were the first database on AOL and CompuServe. They were very early on the web. They gave away a lot of their information. And that had the effect of making them sort of the go-to source for all company information. You could ask anyone at any time, where can I get information on company X? And you would almost be guaranteed someone would say, go to Hoover's. The fascinating thing about Hoover's was that even at its peak, it probably never had more than about 40,000 company records, and most of those were for public companies. It was never a definitive database, but because it was such an early player on the web and it gave away a lot of its data, it got this outsized brand and it got tremendous amounts of traffic. I think that was the attraction of D&B buying them, frankly, because it gave them a way to sort of sell lists and other low-end stuff to the small business market where they never really had a lot of strengths themselves. But this is really the hit the streets, hit the phones, hit the keyboards, original compiler world that we're looking at here. Some more recent players of note, LexisNexis, that huge storehouse of information, decided that they could organize that into sort of virtual company profiles and have built out about 46 million worldwide at this point. It's a fascinating product that just trolls across all the data that LexisNexis has aggregated, and I think some web scraping as well to build these very deep and sophisticated profiles of companies. And my understanding the last time I talked to them is they're actually built on the fly, so it's a virtual database, which is kind of a cool concept. OneSource is a company that traces back, believe it or not, to Lotus 123. They made money selling spreadsheets, woke up one day and decided they wanted to be in the data business. And I won't trace you through the whole history of that, but OneSource is an aggregator as well and has built out a very respected business product that's been around for a long time. Worth noting is that they were recently sold to an investor group that wants to use them as a platform investment for a much bigger play in business information, and they have some of the big names in business information behind it, so definitely worth keeping an eye on their activities. And Factiva is another one that really got into the business of integrating news and press releases and things for their corporate customers, but realized that they too could do something similar to Lexis and build company profiles based on all this news and other data that was coming along. And they too have built a database of about 25 million companies. FactSet and Capital IQ, very similar kind of patterns. Both of them come out of the financial investment information world. Both of them, I think, because they were involved in collecting data on company mergers, ultimately realized that there was a need among their customers to get to more private company information. And both of them fairly recently have announced initiatives to build out more proprietary content. FactSet's a publicly held company. CapIQ is part of Standard & Poor's, and both have very respected platforms, slightly different data sets on them. I would say Capital IQ is probably a little bit more oriented towards the typical data company market than FactSet, which still has a lot of more in the way of statistical data and things like that. But that's a fine distinction. A company you may not have heard of called Oxford Information in upstate New York, in a town so small I don't think there's even a stop sign or a post office. But they've built out a very big national database, and the people I know who've worked with them have been very respectful of the quality of what they've built and the creativity behind the owners. So that's another interesting company worth keeping your eye on. And then there's also a lot of innovators and disruptors, as I'd call them, in this space. We've got Google. You always have to watch what Google's up to. They've been fascinated with what they call the local market for a long time. They're really, you can think of it as sort of an attempt to take on or take out the Yellow Page publishers. They've tried so many different ways to collect local data, but the companies they want most seem to be the ones least likely to have a website, so they've been stymied in most of their attempts and realized finally they have to ask companies for the information. And that seems to be where they're focused now. What I'd point out, though, is as far as I can see, Google is much more interested in getting a listing of a pizza parlor than an engineering services firm at this point, and I don't, frankly, see that changing anytime soon. So they're going after a different piece of the market. I hold out a company called Merchant Circle, about 15 million records, more as representative of a category of companies that are out there basically building, again, B2C, sort of retail-oriented business directories online, but collecting a lot of company information in the process. Manta is another interesting company, claims around 32 million records. They actually started in business as an SEO vendor, did work for a lot of publishers and got phenomenal results in building traffic for them, and I presume woke up one morning and said, hey, we should be doing this for ourselves, and created this product called Manta. And as I understand it, they initially licensed some D&B data, threw it out on the web for free, did their SEO magic around it, got tremendous amounts of traffic, monetized that through advertising. They've taken on a boatload of new funding. And as I understand it now, they're really thinking in terms of building out sort of a broad-based B2B community. That is a tough road. They've got a great start and they've got a lot of resources behind them, but it'll be interesting to see how fast they can accelerate that, because again, that what's in it for me, at least personally to me, doesn't feel tremendously strong. Generate is a company I got very excited about. They were at one point owned by Reed Elsevier, and they had software that really, like ZoomInfo, gathered very complex company and people information, organized it, and did hierarchies, and just did all kinds of magic. What intrigued me about them was that their model was to take that data and sell it to media companies like business newspapers and things who would offer it for free online. And I was worried that with data of that quality being made available through so many big media outlets that it would impact the business. Sort of saved by the bell because Dow Jones acquired them. I'm sure they're using it as part of Factiva, but it's not clear to me that they're still actively pushing it to third parties at this point. So it's sort of come off the table, but it still exists. And then there's Demandbase, a very interesting company that helps companies understand what businesses are coming to their website. So they've built a $30 million name database. A big twist is that they're very interested in hooking companies to IP addresses, which gives them sort of a unique application and probably a lot of insights into these companies that nobody else has. I'm not aware that Demandbase really sells its data as data. I mean, it's really being built as part of their larger application. But their name comes up a lot, and they've put a lot of data under one roof, and they're doing some really smart, cutting-edge things, so that makes them worth watching. And the list of disruptors goes on. Jigsaw and NetProspects, because they're collecting people data, obviously they saw they could shake some company data out of that. And as a consequence, there's significant players there. But I would still say that their primary business is really around people data. They probably object to that, but that's my view. LinkedIn, 2.7 million company profiles at this point. I'd say that same as the above, except to me it's not quite the same as the above, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think it really is all about, can we lick that what's in it for me conundrum? Can we really give people a reason to supply company data and maintain it? There's another one out there called findthebest.com. You can't write them off. 31 million records, great quality content. I think it's started by the ex-founder of DoubleClick. It's got Kleiner Perkins money behind it. What the heck they're doing is beyond me. The execution is poor. The user interface is poor. There's no clear revenue model, but it's really good company data. So it's someone to keep an eye on, and maybe someone smarter than me can figure out what they're up to. Or maybe they're just early stage at this point. And again, Zoom information, just like all of the above to some extent. They collect people information, they collect company information, and they've done a pretty neat job of it over time. So there's an awful lot going on in this area. And just a few seconds on LinkedIn. This is one of their company profiles, and what you'll see in the bottom is some good firmographic data they asked for, which gives you a lot of selectivity. You'll see on the right side that they link the company profiles to all the employees, which gives you another more holistic view of any given company. You can see up in the upper left that they're now asking for product information. It could be a throwaway at this point, but they're thinking about it. And Insights is a fascinating thing that kind of recommends similar companies that you might want to look at. So there's just a lot of clever power around this thing that makes this all very interesting. But probably the big one for me is the upper right corner, where they allow you to follow a company just like you would follow a person or a company in Facebook. But I think LinkedIn is just a much more natural, comfortable environment for most companies to be. But the notion that you could have thousands or tens of thousands of people interested in your company and wanting to follow it starts to make it very compelling for a company to put more information into these profiles and to maintain them over time. It is sort of that Facebook notion, but in a much more of a comfortable and I think logical B2B environment. And that possibly over time is what could crack the what's in it for me issue that bedevils so much around company data. And let's hit you with a few more. Cortera is another one that sort of 20 million companies struck out in business as another D&B killer. What makes them interesting is they've got a lot of proprietary data, and they've got some proprietary transactional data as well. And again, some very smart thinking about how you can spin that to get views of a company and that you wouldn't get any other way. Inside View is an aggregator. They claim that they pull in information from 30,000 different data sources, and they've built that out into a 50 million worldwide company database. Privco is probably the smallest of them all, just kind of interesting to me because they're doing this with desk research technology and tips. So they've shifted around a little bit trying to find the sweet spot of the market, and I think they've found one that's working for them. But it's just, I hold it out primarily as sort of a different model out there. We have InfoArmy, of course, which was started by Jim Fowler of Jigsaw fame, and it is essentially a jigsaw for companies. What makes it really interesting is he's asking people out there to build company profiles, maintain them over time, but the kicker and what makes it interesting is a willingness to do a revenue share with them to give them a real motivation to build high-quality profiles and hold them. It's startup phase. It could very well pivot in different directions, but given the person behind it and the amount of money raised already, I think it's definitely one that should be on your short list to watch. You may have run across Corporation Wiki, 8 million names. It seems to have D&B listings underlying it. What makes it interesting is it sort of has a little visualization element to it where you can see relationships between people and companies, but it's just, it seems to me, an unrealized concept. It's depending much more on the wiki contributions, and they're just not there, so the visualizations rarely show you much of interest. But some clever thinking in there. And Data.com, again, we have to see how they're going to involve it, how hard they're going to get behind it and push it. But it could be a platform that some of you would want to participate in as well, because it gives you very tight integration and access to the whole Salesforce market. So there's an awful lot going out there in the marketplace. Let me throw out a couple non-players that might be worth watching, and I've got no inside information here, just sort of running off instinct. I'd hold out Bloomberg, and not just because of the deep pockets factor, but it's one of the few really big players out there that, in my view, has no fear of going out to create content, where so many big players do at this point. We've seen the launch of BGov and Bloomberg Law, which shows a willingness to move outside the core financial business. And you can make a case that its growing B2B media empire would sit very comfortably alongside a very expansive national company database. Who knows? Just a thought. Neustar is a company that got its start in phone number portability. If you wanted to move from Verizon to AT&T and keep your cell phone number, that was Neustar behind the scenes making that happen. I think they also run the .biz top-level domain and a few other things. A surprisingly large business with a very sophisticated view, because it wants to say, well, what else can we do about being in the middle of business information flows? They did a partnership with a company called Locationary, which is sort of a federated search way of thinking about centralizing business data. They did a very large acquisition of Targus Info, which has in there a company called LocalEase, which aspires to being the central reference database for business information online. Companies would put it in once, and everyone who wanted business information would access it through LocalEase. So again, there's some big forward thinking going on here, and they've got some resources which makes them worth watching. Coface is, I believe, a French-based company. You can sort of shorthand call it the European D&B. Hasn't had much U.S. presence, but very quietly about 2 years ago acquired a business called Compass US and Compass Canada, which are traditional company databases. It'll be very interesting to see if they're going to make a move into the U.S. market. And again, they would come at it with some fairly substantial resources. So let me give you some takeaway thinking on this whole thing. Getting to depth and breadth really demands you to think in a very pragmatic way. There are no silver bullet solutions, no one way to go about this. It seems to be increasingly sort of mix and match models to get to the data you need. License where you have to, build it where you have to. Increasing reliance on textual content, especially news, because that gives you events, and events are really the drivers behind sales triggers that a company did an acquisition or opened a new plant. That's useful information in a sales context. But it also gives you some context around the company as well. We're seeing that the smarter players out there really understand the value of change over time and historical data, because if you watch how a company evolves over time, you can infer all sorts of very valuable pieces of information about it, and often information that wouldn't be otherwise available. And you see, too, that with all this data coming together, there's just simply a need to mine it more efficiently. The publishers need to pre-process it more to make it more accessible to the users, and users need powerful tools both to filter the data and to do analytics on the data. So there's a lot of need out there to get more sophisticated on the back end as well. And some more trends that we see out there. Deep company data does have value, but the need is closely coupled to that for people data. And there's just a lot of licensing partnering going on in this area, and I think that's going to continue, and I think it makes sense and it's good. Sales triggers, these events like a merger or an acquisition or a new plant or new key hire are going to get increasingly sophisticated and powerful. And again, a lot of this is going to be driven by that change over time data. Holding on to the historical information and comparing it yields all sorts of powerful insights. Frankly, I don't think any definitive broad-based company database is going to emerge. I think there's going to be lots of flavors out there because people look at the need and the opportunity differently, and different markets need different data elements legitimately for different reasons. So I don't think there's ever going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to company data. And I think also that these broad-based databases are forcing the vertical company databases to really up their games. And that's going to kind of get interesting because a lot of the broad-based publishers are very technology-driven, and that's something that is an expensive thing for a smaller publisher to get into. So we're going to probably see a lot more pressure on vertically oriented company data sets over time as the technology gets more sophisticated and probably gets more expensive as well. Interestingly, too, I think the need for these broad but shallow databases, the info group type data, is not going to disappear. It's easy to say, oh, that's over and done with. But I think it's going to remain a solid business. I don't think it's going to be much of a growth business. But there are people who just simply need to get at every gas station in the country or every mattress retailer, and they'll take what they can get. It's not worth anyone else to build out detailed profiles on them. There's just sort of an organic need for that kind of information, especially since it tends to be priced well. And because these people are original compilers, they also often are offering sort of backbone reference databases that other people are using in different ways, because they're as close to being comprehensive as anyone. And that gives them another level of value that I think is going to guarantee that we're going to see them around for a while. And just to wrap everything up, I think you should expect to see there's not going to be any single winner in company information. There's just too big a need, too big a market, too many specialized applications. We're going to see increasing emphasis on integration with software, and it really is all about sales, except for smaller applications like business intelligence and things like that. This is predominantly sales we're talking about and prospecting. We're going to see continued multi-source compilation strategies. Not one person is going to be able to do everything at a sufficiently good level that they don't need anyone else. So the company people will continue to license people data. It will not surprise me if they ultimately start licensing product data. We're going to see smarter triggers over time and more inferential data, the use of change over time data. And we're going to see also, I think, increasingly powerful search front ends for users. There's going to be analytics plus much more ability to dive into these large data sets that are being built. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. So I think we've got a couple minutes for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Russell. We actually have a ton of questions. I'm just going to dive right into it. And for everybody, since we do have so many questions, if we have not gotten to your specific question, we're happy to follow up afterwards. But we're going to take as many questions as we can now and just get going to it. So here's a question. Can you please give us an example of how a data provider is optimized for CRM or Salesforce type of application?
I think it's really more about integration, because you have often these users who are not technologically all that sophisticated. So to have an API that really hooks you into Salesforce or hooks you into one of the other platforms can be very compelling, both to the software company and to the user and to the data publisher. It offers obviously a sales channel as well. But it's really just being able to port data in quickly, or in more sophisticated applications, use it to maintain or augment your own data. So there's two different approaches there. But really it's building APIs and understanding intimately how particular software products work, so you can pump your data in both painlessly and to best effect.
Great. I'll just answer a few questions that have come in. Yes, we are going to be making this presentation available after the fact, and you'll be getting an email with that information at the conclusion of this webinar. Here's a question. Did I hear correctly that in Europe, private company data like ownership and financial data is publicly available?
Yeah, in most of Europe, you have to file it, and it becomes public record data. In UK, it's something called Companies House. You can go there. They've got an online website, and you can buy detailed financial and organizational information on almost any company. I think it runs around $3 a record, and there's private players in the market as well.
Next question is, do you characterize private company information in Canada as private in the United States?
My best understanding of the Canadian market is it sort of mirrors the U.S. market, but I will not claim any particular expertise there.
Moving on, can you discuss info on board members and CXO level staff, for example, companies like BoardX?
Again, I think board members in certain applications can be very valuable. It was an old trick in the old days of print directories when you couldn't get any people information and slam in the board members, because then you could say I have 6 people. They tend not to be decision makers or buyers, but I think in specialized applications where people really do specifically want to know about the board members, obviously there's value there. But again, I think the way this market's going to shape itself is the focus is going to shift back to who are the buyers, who are the decision makers, who's got a budget.
Next question. Do you feel anybody is really unique in how they collect their data? And who do you think is the most differentiated?
That's an interesting question. I think everyone's sort of doing different versions of a mix and match out there. I don't know that anyone has really totally revolutionized it. I would have to say for novelty, InfoArmy, if they can pull it off, is going to do something pretty dramatic. But basically it's a combination of scraping, licensing, and social techniques, and everyone's just putting different emphasis on different aspects of it.
Great. We are running out of time. There are a few other questions, so we want to basically respect the top of the hour. So if your question was not answered, we will follow up with you. And we've got all of them here in the chat window. So Russell, thank you very, very much for your time. This has been very insightful. To the many people who are participating in today's webinar and listening in, thank you for your time. We welcome your comments and feedback, as well as suggestions for any other topics that you would like to hear about. And you've been staring at the upcoming calendar, so I won't reiterate that. So for now, I will just wish you all a great day, and until next time, take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Please stand by.